There I was, diesel exhaust still lingering from my 2/10 of a mile drive, when a woman in a blinding neon green tracksuit and designer stilettos struts up my driveway like she owns the pavement. Without so much as a hello, she slaps a $500 citation on my windshield like she's serving me with a lawsuit. Apparently, my U-Haul was committing the unforgivable crime of disrupting the visual harmony of Willowbrook Estates. I'm Marcus, and I hadn't even turned the engine off before the HOA president lets call her Dear Drew, because that's literally her name, pulled out a stack of violation notices thicker than an old phone book, 14 in total, mailbox, too short, grass too long, doormat the wrong color. I swear, if she could find a clause against breathing too loudly, I'd have been fined for that too. Reeking of drugstore perfume and pure self-importance, she informed me I had 48 hours to cough up to $1,100 or risk foreclosure. But here's the part that made me grin. Deirdre had no idea she'd just picked a fight with the guy who collects her rent. So, tell me, if some HOA dictator hit you with a stack of fines before you'd even unpacked your toothbrush, what would you do? Where are you watching from? And what's your most outrageous HOA nightmare? Let me rewind to how I landed in this circus. 3 months earlier, I was in Phoenix, managing commercial properties until the company decided my entire department was no longer essential. After 20 years of keeping their buildings in the black, I got a cardboard box and a security escort out the door. And just to make sure the day was unforgettable, my ex-wife chose that exact moment to inform me she was keeping the house and moving in with her yoga instructor, a guy named Moonbeam, who peddles crystals at farmers markets. So when my late great-aunt Millicent's lawyer called to say she'd left me her place in Colorado, it felt like a rescue rope. Millicent was my grandmother's sister, a tiny powerhouse who could rebuild a car transmission and organize a church bake sale in the same weekend. When her husband Frank was killed in Vietnam, she raised 3 kids alone, worked double shifts at a diner, and somehow still found time to feed every stray cat in a 5-block radius. If there's one thing to decades in property management teaches you, it's this: always read the fine print, especially with HOAs. They're like tiny governments, complete with the corruption potential, but without the oversight. Quick fact: HOA boards have fiduciary responsibilities like corporate directors, meaning they can be personally on the hook for financial misconduct. That's going to be important later. Her house sat on a corner lot in Willowbrook Estates, a 47-home subdivision that started middle class in the late 70s but gradually turned upscale. Now it's the sort of place where residents drive high-end cars but still bicker about splitting the dinner bill. The monthly HOA dues had crept up to $180, supposedly covering landscaping, pool upkeep, and community standards enforcement. Phrase as ominous as it sounds. Looking back, I should have been suspicious when the lawyer mentioned Millicent had a few disagreements with the HOA. I figured it was harmless. Maybe she planted petunias instead of pansies or committed the mortal sin of owning a garden. No me. Sweet, naive me. Fast forward to August. The heat was making the asphalt smell like a tire fire when Deirdre emerged from her spotless white BMW like some kind of suburban cyborg. She was textbook HOA royalty, the type who peaked as homecoming queen in '87 and has been chasing that rush of authority ever since. Her athleisure outfit probably cost more than some people's rent, and she had a pro-grade camera swinging from her neck like she was documenting war crimes instead of mailbox chips. She began circling my truck with surgical precision, snapping photos so quickly the shutter sounded like a Geiger counter at Chernobyl. My molars hurt just listening to it. Then came the violation notices: high-quality card stock, embossed letterhead, my name already written in elegant calligraphy. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crackdown. This was planned, weaponized bureaucracy. Commercial vehicles are banned in residential zones, she announced, pointing to the faded Phoenix Property Solutions logo on my F-150. Never mind that it's my personal truck, the decals alone made me a threat to the neighborhood's purity. Next, she gestured at Aunt Millicent's beloved rose bushes, pink climbers that had been blooming since the Carter administration. Apparently, they were unauthorized landscaping because no one had filed Form 27B with the Sacred Committee for Aesthetic Purity. Then, with the solemnity of a doctor delivering bad news, she said, mailbox shows paint degradation beyond acceptable standards. 3 tiny chips, barely visible unless you went hunting for flaws. Meanwhile, I noticed neighbors peeking through blinds like they were watching a mob hit. Not curious, afraid. An elderly woman across the street yanked her blinds shut when Deirdre glanced her way. A guy washing his car suddenly got very interested in checking his tire pressure. And then came her parting shot. The previous owner also had compliance issues before her. Unfortunate passing. The way she said unfortunate chilled me, like Millicent's death was just another completed task on her to-do list. I kept calm and asked to see the HOA's covenants and financials. You'd think I'd requested her browser history and tax returns. Suddenly, everything was confidential and needed formal board approval. When I mentioned my background in commercial property management, her smile twitched, revealing something sharp underneath. She promised appropriate enforcement measures and clicked away, leaving me with $2,100 in bogus fines and the distinct feeling I'd just been targeted for elimination. What she didn't know: I don't just manage properties, I own them. Including, as fate would have it, the very home she lives in. The next morning, a certified letter was wedged in my door like a mob contract. Overnight, she'd escalated into full-blown psychological warfare that would make Pentagon planners take notes. This wasn't just another violation notice, it was a legal blitzkrieg wrapped in HOA letterhead. The fines had somehow ballooned to $2,870, thanks to administrative processing fees and late penalties that apparently reproduced overnight. She'd attached time-stamped photos from every angle imaginable, evidence fit for a crime lab, and threatened to place a lien within 30 days. She'd even CC'd the management company and a lawyer whose name sounded like he specialized in evicting orphans. Her mistake. Thinking I'd fold like every other homeowner, she steamrolled. 20 years in property management teaches you one priceless skill: reading the fine print nobody else bothers with. So I headed to the county recorder's office, a fluorescent-lit purgatory where the air smells like old paper and dashed hopes, and the clerks look like you personally caused their back pain. The beauty of public records. Deirdre's little empire had to follow real rules, not whatever she scribbled on cocktail napkins. And what I found: reality TV-level drama. The original 1983 HOA covenants were about 12 pages of basic neighborly guidelines. Keep your yard presentable. Don't paint your house like a circus tent. Don't run a used car lot from your driveway. Over the years, it had mutated into a 47-page authoritarian handbook dictating everything from acceptable Christmas lights to approved dog-walking routes. Most HOA amendments require homeowner votes. If those votes didn't happen, the new rules are worth about as much as a chocolate teapot. Better yet, Aunt Millicent's roses, grandfathered in under the original covenants. Deirdre's violation notice was legally worthless, but the jackpot was in the financials. As a property owner, I had the right to inspect them, and the numbers were sketchier than a $3 bill. Expenses inflated beyond reason, budgets that looked like they'd been written by a fortune cookie, and landscaping charges that didn't match the contractor's invoices. That's when Gladys appeared like some neighborhood guardian angel with dirt on everyone. 78 years old, retired librarian, eyes sharp as a hawk. She handed me a folder thick enough to stop a bullet. She'd been documenting Deirdre's reign for years, 12 families into years, all taken down the same way: crushing fines, impossible deadlines, forced sales for way under market value. And the real estate company handling those sales? No surprise there. 3 elderly residents had already been pushed out. Mrs. Olivia lost her home over a mailbox post that leaned 2 degrees off vertical. The Rodriguez family, too many kids' toys in the yard. Translation: a single bike in view. Mr. Patterson, a Korean War vet, was fined for having an improperly proportioned American flag. That afternoon, Deirdre showed up again, this time with her boyfriend, Chad, wearing a knockoff security badge you could probably buy online. They demanded to come inside to inspect for interior covenant violations, which doesn't even exist in real law. I declined, citing little things like the Fourth Amendment. Chad started snapping pictures through my windows like a bargain bin pie. That's when I dropped my first breadcrumb loud enough for nearby ears. Funny thing, I said. The HOA budget shows 40 grand in landscaping costs, but the contractors only been paid 15. Makes you wonder where the other 25,000 went. The stillness was so absolute you could have heard a flea cough. Deirdre's face flickered through more shades than a glitching neon sign, and Chad suddenly remembered he had pressing business somewhere far, far away. They bolted for their BMW, quicker than vampires escaping sunrise, but not before Deirdre promised me serious legal repercussions for what she called my harassment and intimidation. I just smiled, gave them a cheery wave, and mentally noted I was only just getting started. Her comeback to my little accounting question arrived fast and landed about as gently as a brick through a glass pane. The next morning, I was sipping coffee and watching the sun creep up when a city code enforcement truck pulled into the drive. Out stepped an inspector who looked like he'd give anything to be anywhere else on earth. Got a complaint about an abandoned commercial vehicle. He mumbled, scanning his clipboard with the energy of a man reading his own death notice. He circled my perfectly legal F-150, found nothing wrong, and apologized for wasting our time. But before leaving, he leaned in and said, "Tip came in at 6 a.m., caller knew your exact address and vehicle description. A little too specific for some random drive-by." 2 hours later, the state contractor's licensing board called. Someone had reported that I was running an unlicensed business out of my house. The investigator, polite but thorough, asked if I was operating Phoenix Property Solutions from my Colorado address. I told him I'd moved, wasn't running any business, and that the decals were leftovers from my old work truck. He closed the case in 5 minutes, but the message was crystal clear. Deirdre had decided to hit back hard. Around 2 a.m. that night, I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel outside. When you live alone, your ears get good at picking up what doesn't belong, and these didn't. I peeked through the blinds just in time to catch a white BMW creeping past like a suburban stalker van. By morning, my mailbox had been tagged with random spray paint squiggles, nothing obscene, just enough to rack up another petty violation. Oh, and someone had left a perfectly placed pile of dog mess right on my front porch. That kind of precision doesn't scream random mutt. Luckily, I'd installed security cameras the day before. Property management teaches you paranoia early. Too many tenants think deposits are more like suggestions. The footage was a masterpiece. Deirdre's BMW circling the block at 17 a.m., her license plate in plain view, and Chad bumbling around my yard like the least stealthy ninja alive. But while she was dabbling in amateur vandalism, I was digging deeper into the HOA's finances, and what I found was twisted enough to make a pretzel blush. Remember the landscaping numbers I mentioned? That was just the appetizer. The pool cleaning contract was the crown jewel. $800 a month for a community pool barely 30 feet long and used about as often as a snowball in Phoenix. I called a few local pool companies. Going rate, around $200. Yet Elite Pool Services was charging for times that, despite the water being murky green, littered with leaves, and smelling like something had died in there back when Clinton was in office. The landscaping deal was even richer. $3,000 a month for comprehensive grounds maintenance, which meant mowing 47 tiny lawns and trimming a few bushes. I've managed shopping centers on less, but Mountain View Landscaping was apparently high-end. If showing up twice a month and running a mower for an hour counted as luxury service, then there were the legal fees, $15,000 a year for compliance enforcement. Most HOAs spend $2,000 tops, and that's with real legal issues. But here, enforcing mailbox height apparently required the kind of lawyering reserved for corporate mergers. My little investigation started attracting allies. Bob, a Vietnam vet with hands like machine parts, knocked on my door one evening with a beer and some intel. Sophia, a single mom and paralegal, offered to dig into the legal side. Even Pastor Williams from the church came by, saying Deirdre had once tried to get them cited for excessive Sunday parking. But she wasn't done with her intimidation games. She filed a police report claiming I'd confronted her and made threats about her finances. Officer Rodriguez showed up looking like he'd rather be catching real criminals. One glance at my camera footage and he knew it was bogus. His parting advice: document everything. This pattern usually gets worse before it gets better. Then Deirdre made her biggest blunder yet, demanding he arrest me for disturbing the peace and intimidating a public official. Apparently, HOA president now counted as public office. Rodriguez kept it professional but firm. "Ma'am, asking about HOA finances isn't a crime. Filing false police reports, however, is." As I watched her stomp back to the BMW, it clicked. She wasn't just being petty anymore. She was desperate. People don't escalate this fast unless they're hiding something serious. And tucked away in great Aunt Millicent's attic, I was about to find out what Deirdre floored it into desperation mode by calling an emergency HOA board meeting with only 24 hours notice, a direct violation of the bylaws that require 72. Desperate people don't read fine print, they bulldoze through it. The meeting was in her living room, which felt like being called to the principal's office if the principal wore yoga pants and lit too many vanilla candles. She'd arranged the furniture like a courtroom, herself parked behind a giant oak desk worth more than most cars. The agenda, printed on her real estate letterhead, had one item: emergency foreclosure proceedings against 1247 Maple Street. Only 3 of the 5 board members showed. No quorum, which meant they couldn't vote on anything more serious than donut flavors, but Deirdre plowed on like a freight train with no brakes until Gladys appeared in the doorway like an avenging librarian. Months of silence gone, she started reciting Robert's Rules of Order like scripture. Point of order: you cannot conduct official business without a quorum. This meeting is procedurally invalid. That's when Deirdre's mask shattered. She screamed, actually screamed, calling Gladys a meddling old busybody, and threatening fines for disrupting proceedings. It was a transformation worthy of time-lapse, suburban princess to unhinged tyrant in under 3 seconds. Meanwhile, Sophia had dug up something that set my property management senses tingling. A spider web of shell companies, Mountain View Landscaping, owned by Deirdre's 23-year-old nephew, whose resume was GameStop cashier and fired pizza delivery guy. Elite Pool Services, that was Chad, armed with YouTube knowledge and optimism. Legal Solutions LLC, her college roommate's firm, specializing in what I'll politely call imaginative HOA law. Every vendor was family or friends, all billing luxury resort rates, and the enforcement pattern: surgical, elderly residents, single parents, and anyone likely to fold fast got hammered. The Hendersons got cited for a non-compliant garden gnome. Meanwhile, a McMansion with actual violations sailed by untouched. My morning coffee chats at Rosie's Diner were morphing into a resistance cell. 23 neighbors showed at the latest, sharing their own war stories, while painting a picture of systematic harassment. Mrs. Patterson fined for excessive memorial decor after placing a small flag for her late husband's service. The Johnson kids, their chalk drawings lasted too long, making them a covenant violation. Bob's engineering report sealed it, decades of experience, and he said the infrastructure was a wreck. Road repairs billed but never done. Drainage projects existing only on paper. A security system made up of one busted camera pointed at a tree. So Deirdre went nuclear, hiring a pie, likely from the same bargain bin where Chad got his fake badge, to dig up dirt on me. Suddenly, rumors were everywhere. My military discharge was dishonorable. It wasn't. I was in a gang because I'd lived in Phoenix, and my great-aunt left me the house because I blackmailed her. Impressive, since she was already dead. The racial undertones weren't subtle. She painted me as an outside agitator bent on wrecking their safe little world, even creating fake social media accounts to push the lies. But while she was building a house of fiction, I was building a house of evidence, obsessive, airtight, and ready to crush her. Then came her final gambit, a certified letter claiming I owed $47,000 in special assessments for upgrades, new playground, better security, road repairs, none of which existed. Pay in 10 days or face a lien. I read it twice, then laughed. She'd just handed me the overreach I was waiting for. When the court-ordered financials arrived, the air smelled like rain and revolution. My lawyer had pulled strings, and suddenly Deirdre's secrets were spread across my dining room table. What I saw made 20 years of property fraud cases look amateur. Over $300,000 siphoned from HOA accounts in a shell game worthy of Bernie Madoff. Fake emergency assessments for imaginary work. Invoices for undelivered materials. Payments to newly minted businesses owned by her relatives. But the knockout punch came from the property title research. My lawyer found it buried in the mineral rights. Great-Aunt Millicent's land had a small natural gas deposit. Not huge, but enough for Rocky Mountain Energy to pay royalties for 3 years, royalties that should have gone to me. Instead, they'd been funneled into the HOA account, with Deirdre the only signatory. $18,000 of my money, stolen without my knowledge. That gave me the standing to demand a forensic audit of every HOA transaction since she took over. The key to the safety deposit box was hiding in plain sight, tucked between apple pie and pot roast recipes in my aunt's old box. Inside, 5 years of meticulous evidence, audio of Deirdre bragging about creative accounting and dodging those ridiculous rules, forged signatures on amendments never voted on, bank records showing systematic theft. The last document hit hardest, a letter from my aunt, penned 2 weeks before she died. Marcus, if you're reading this, then Deirdre Pickering has probably tried to destroy what's left of our community. I've gathered what I could, but I'm too old and tired to keep fighting. Maybe you're not. Everything you need is here. Make them pay for what they've done. Suddenly, her random heart attack felt a lot less random. Her medical records, subpoenaed during the inheritance process, showed dangerous blood pressure spikes starting exactly when Deirdre began her harassment campaign. The stress had killed her, and Deirdre had probably celebrated. My drive had shifted from simply protecting myself to something far more profound. It was no longer about petty disputes over mailbox measurements or lawn ordinances. This had become about honoring the legacy of a woman who had spent her final months shielding her neighbors from a predator. The facts stacked up to multiple serious federal offenses: mail fraud, wire fraud, embezzlement, the kind of crimes that put you squarely on the FBI's radar. Her violations of real estate licensing laws were documented in agonizingly precise detail. When you added up the inflated contracts, bogus appraisals, and stolen royalty checks, the total theft neared $450,000. The best part, Deirdre had no clue how much we had on her. She believed she was just fending off one disgruntled homeowner who was asking a few inconvenient questions. She had no idea that my great-aunt Millicent had been quietly assembling an airtight case against her for years, and that I now held every single piece of that evidence. The annual HOA meeting, required by law, couldn't be canceled once the official notice had gone out. Major decisions required 67% of homeowners present, which meant I needed at least 32 attendees. Based on the updates from my coffee shop Intel network, I already had 31 households committed, and counting. Deirdre was about to discover her reign of intimidation was finished. She just didn't know it yet. Great-Aunt Millicent's dining room had morphed into a hybrid between a battlefield command center and an FBI field office. I'd pushed her antique table against the wall and loaded it with bankers' boxes, stacks of legal documents, and a massive case timeline that looked straight out of a conspiracy thriller. Red string-connected photographs, financial statements, and violation notices in a web so detailed it could make a detective jealous. Gladys, self-appointed chief intelligence officer, arrived with homemade cookies and 40 years' worth of librarian-level organization skills. Sophia revealed herself to be a legal research powerhouse disguised as a paralegal, spending her evenings in the law library and emerging with case law and procedural strategies that even my attorney admitted surpassed many practicing lawyers. Her own dining table was buried under a rainbow of color-coded folders: red for criminal charges, blue for civil damages, yellow for procedural violations. It felt like I was recruiting the Avengers, if the Avengers specialized in dismantling HOA corruption instead of fighting aliens. Jennifer Olivia, my lead attorney, had 15 years of experience in HOA law and a reputation for reducing crooked board members to tears in depositions. She brought in a forensic accountant capable of following money trails through more shell companies than a Russian oligarch's tax returns. Our team also included a private investigator focused on financial crimes and a media consultant who once produced investigative news segments before going freelance. Even the state consumer protection attorney offered pro bono assistance, a sure sign that this was no longer a petty neighborhood issue but something much larger. What began as simple community outreach turned into a grassroots uprising that could have made a political campaign director proud. I went door to door like I was running for mayor, explaining homeowners' rights and revealing the truth about Deirdre's financial shell game. The WhatsApp group Sophia started exploded from 5 members to 37 in just 2 weeks, with neighbors trading photos, evidence, and moral support. After decades of silent fear, Pastor Williams offered the church basement for our strategy meetings, giving our cause a kind of moral authority Deirdre couldn't touch. Bob, an engineer, began methodically documenting every infrastructure lie she had told. His report read like a criminal indictment: road repairs that never took place, drainage projects that existed only on invoices, and a security system consisting of one broken camera aimed at a maple tree. The forensic accountant's work was surgical in its precision. Every shady transaction was tracked through subpoenaed bank records from the Attorney General's office. The pattern was painfully clear: fake invoices, inflated payments, and funds routed through family-run shell companies before ending up in accounts controlled by Deirdre and her allies. The resulting flowchart looked like a diagram for organized crime, because that's essentially what it was. Sophia assembled enough legal paperwork to overwhelm a courthouse: cease and desist orders for harassment, injunctions to freeze HOA accounts, criminal referral packets for multiple agencies, and even a class action framework for affected residents. She also drafted a petition to remove Deirdre from the board for financial mismanagement and breach of fiduciary duty. Our media outreach revolved around Sarah Mitchell, a local journalist known for exposing government corruption. She had been investigating HOA abuse across Colorado and jumped on our story with the enthusiasm of a kid on Christmas morning. The local Denver TV affiliate showed interest too, especially when I mentioned the size of the fraud and the elderly residents forced out of their homes. Our evidence package grew to 847 pages: financial records, audio, video, and sworn statements. Drawing from my experience in commercial real estate, I knew judges loved visual aids, so we prepared before and after photos comparing promised improvements to the grim reality. The contrast was devastating: invoices for playgrounds that never existed, bills for roadwork that was never done, payments for landscaping that looked like it had been maintained by blindfolded amateurs. I even rehearsed my presentation with the community theater group at Pastor Williams's church, because nothing prepares you for a hostile audience like amateur actors critiquing your delivery. They helped me anticipate Deirdre's rebuttals and craft counter-arguments that would hold up under media scrutiny. Sophia turned my homeowner education materials into a handbook: HOA rights and remedies, explaining how to demand financial transparency, fight discriminatory enforcement, and spot the warning signs of board corruption. Most people don't realize HOA boards have the same fiduciary responsibilities as corporate directors, meaning they can be personally liable for financial misconduct. I'd once read about a Texas case where board members had to pay restitution from their own pockets after a forensic audit exposed theft. We reserved the community center for the annual meeting, equipped with professional recording gear and legal observers from the Attorney General's office. Media attendance was locked in, because nothing keeps people honest like the threat of appearing on the evening news. The night before the showdown, I sat in Great Aunt Millicent's kitchen, surrounded by evidence and the quiet strength of community solidarity. I felt something I hadn't experienced since my military service: the uncheckable calm that comes from preparation and moral clarity. Deirdre had no idea what was about to land on her. Her reaction to discovering my coalition was like watching a trapped animal realize the walls were closing in. Word had clearly spread through the neighborhood grapevine, faster and more accurately than any formal intelligence network. Her first move was to try canceling the meeting, citing security threats and outside agitators. The irony was rich: the same woman who had spent years terrorizing elderly residents now claimed to fear for her safety. But Colorado law is unambiguous: once proper notice is sent, an HOA meeting cannot simply be called off for convenience. She hired a security company to intimidate residents, which blew up in her face when the company's manager realized she couldn't even explain what danger they were supposed to be guarding against. Professional security guards don't like being cast as thugs in a petty HOA drama. Her rumor mill went into overdrive: absurd tales that I was orchestrating a violent takeover that would destroy property values. Mrs. Rodriguez was told I was bringing in a gang, news, apparently, to my gang of retired librarians, church volunteers, and veterans. Meanwhile, her finances were circling the drain. She tried to pull the remaining $89,000 from HOA accounts, only to find the bank had frozen them pending investigation. When that failed, she attempted to destroy financial records, adding obstruction of justice to her growing rap sheet. She even tried bribing the forensic accountant with real estate commissions, apparently unaware that bribing an expert witness in an active case is exactly the kind of thing that lands you in federal prison. The personal attacks escalated to outright stalking. Fake online reviews appeared, labeling me violent and unstable. She filed false DMV reports to suspend my truck registration, inventing unsafe modifications that didn't exist. Her boyfriend Chad even tailed me to job interviews because apparently an unemployed property manager still posed enough of a threat to warrant surveillance. The harassment hit a new level when she started following me around the grocery store, lurking at the end of each aisle. When I confronted her, she claimed she was monitoring potential threats to community safety. The store manager promptly told her that what she was doing was called stalking and escorted her out. The violation notices she sent to coalition members were petty masterpieces. Gladys cited for excessive bird feeding. Sophia written up because her kids' bikes were improperly stored in her own garage. Bob's military flag flagged for displaying unauthorized colors on non-federal holidays. Elderly residents began receiving anonymous late-night calls, warning them to mind their own business. When Gladys's car windshield cracked overnight, the message was clear. Sophia found dead flowers on her doorstep with a note reading, "Mind your own business or this could be you." Subtle as a brick, but delivered with the cowardice of anonymity. We filed police reports. Officer Rodriguez just shook his head and added it to the Pickering file. Apparently, we weren't her first victims. But while she played suburban terrorist, I documented everything. Every threat, every act of vandalism, every intimidation attempt. Her longtime lawyer, a college friend, suddenly withdrew when she realized the criminal exposure was too much for a civil attorney to handle. The replacement lawyer immediately floated a plea deal, partial restitution for reduced charges. I rejected anything that didn't involve full repayment and criminal prosecution. At this point, it wasn't about money. It was about justice for Aunt Millicent and protecting every future resident from her abuse. The community rallied. Yard signs appeared overnight demanding transparency in HOA leadership. Local business owners offered meeting spaces. A retired police officer volunteered security support. As the meeting drew near, her desperation went nuclear. Every move she made tightened the noose and united the neighborhood further. She was about to learn. Terror works until people stop being afraid. Then it just makes them furious. Her complete unraveling came when she realized criminal charges were no longer just possible, they were inevitable. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit was asking questions. The state attorney general's case was taking shape. Even her own lawyer had essentially fired her. So she attempted what could only be described as a one-way trip to Crazy Town. She tried fleeing to her sister's place in Montana, apparently thinking that state lines erase federal mail fraud charges. But the court had frozen her credit cards, and her BMW broke down outside Denver. Nothing says criminal mastermind like being stranded on I-25 because you can't afford a tow truck. She slunk back into Willowbrook Estates 48 hours later, looking like she'd been living out of her car, which she probably had. Neighbors peered from behind curtains like they were watching the world's worst fugitive limp home from a failed escape attempt. Then came her most desperate move yet, a bribe so sloppy it could have embarrassed a C-list mob movie. At 11 p.m., she knocked on my door holding a duffel bag stuffed with $50,000 in cash, calling it restitution for any inconvenience. She actually said, "Let's put this unpleasantness behind us," while shoving the bag forward like some low-end suburban crime boss. She had no idea I was wired up for the FBI. Agent Martinez came up with the idea after Deirdre's botched escape attempt. Figuring my background in property management made me an ideal candidate for undercover work. And he wasn't wrong. The recording we got was pure gold. 47 straight minutes of Deirdre openly admitting she'd siphoned off HOA funds, cooked up bogus assessments, and massaged the books to bankroll her own lifestyle. My favorite moment, when she leaned in and said, "You know how these communities operate, right? The residents are sheep who need someone to make decisions for them." I was providing a service. The FBI agent on the other end probably snapped a pencil in half hearing that. And when she tried to bribe me, well, that added one more felony to her growing list. But more importantly, we now had a confession that made prosecution practically a done deal. She'd just gift-wrapped the government enough evidence to bury her case for good. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was rallying like never before. Out of 47 households, 41 had joined our cause. The only 6 holdouts were her relatives or people financially tied to her. Our community fund for helping elderly residents with legal fees had ballooned to $12,000, mostly small contributions that showed our neighbors weren't just talking about justice. They were paying for it. The local restaurant offered free catering for our next meeting. The hardware store donated supplies for repairs after vandalism. and even our mailmen started tipping us off about suspicious activity near coalition homes. Apparently, messing with the mail is a line federal employees take very seriously. Word was spreading far beyond our block. HOA abuse watchdog groups picked up our story from social media, and suddenly we were getting calls from communities across the country fighting similar corruption. The hashtag #HatMillicentArmy was trending. Okay, maybe only in the property management niche, but still, it felt like celebrity status for those of us standing up to suburban dictatorship. Then came the collapse. Her real estate brokerage dumped her the second the bribery story went public. The state licensing board suspended her pending investigation. Old clients started filing complaints about unethical behavior stretching back years. She tried filing for bankruptcy to shield her assets, only making federal prosecutors hungrier to track them down. The final punch: her own home went into foreclosure. The woman who had been threatening her neighbors with losing their houses couldn't keep up her own mortgage once her scam came to light. If that's not poetic justice, I don't know what is. Her last desperate move was pure theater. She planned to paint me as an outside agitator sent to tear the community apart, throw all the blame on the management company, and bring in Chad plus 3 relatives to stack the meeting with supporters. She even tried recruiting help from other HOAs, warning them that if they didn't unite, outside interference could come for them next. But while she was scrambling for appearances, I was finishing the presentation that would take her down for good. The evidence was airtight. The forensic accountant's report was a wrecking ball: clear numbers, devastating visuals. Our attorney's analysis spelled out 12 separate felonies backed with irrefutable proof. Bob's engineering report showed thousands wasted on phantom infrastructure projects. And our private investigator had caught her committing financial crimes in real time. The night before the annual meeting, I visited Great Aunt Millicent's grave one more time. I told her about the mountain of evidence, the neighbors we'd brought together, and the justice we were about to deliver. It was a warm August evening, fireflies floating over the headstone. Tomorrow, Deirdre Pickering would finally face the reckoning my great aunt had been setting in motion for years, and I'd make sure every moment honored her. Morning of the meeting, the community center buzzed with tension, like the air before a thunderstorm. By 7 a.m., folks were showing up with folding chairs and coffee thermoses, staking out spots like it was the biggest neighborhood event in decades. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with floor wax from the overnight cleaning, while 73 residents crammed into a space meant for 50. Local media set up cameras in back as if this were a political debate. Sarah Mitchell from the paper was there, notebook ready. Even the Denver TV station had sent their investigative reporter. Apparently, HOA corruption now made good television. Deirdre arrived 20 minutes late, clearly aiming for dramatic effect. She marched in with Chad and her 3 reluctant relatives, dressed in a navy blazer, screaming, "I'm still in charge," and carrying a briefcase likely filled with legal threats, not legal authority. She went straight into seizing control, throwing around procedural jargon and board prerogatives like some small-town dictator. First order of business, removing me for disruptive behavior and threatening community safety. That's when Gladys stood up, radiating righteous fury. Point of order, she boomed, voice carrying down the street. Under Colorado law and our bylaws, homeowners get input before business is conducted. You can't just toss people out without due process. The room erupted in cheers. Deirdre's face went through more shades than a faulty mood ring. She tried banging a gavel she had no right to use, but the crowd wasn't listening. I took the floor with the calm certainty of someone holding every winning card. I started with a tribute to Aunt Millicent, explaining how she'd spent her last years collecting proof to protect her neighbors from financial predators. Then I launched the presentation for $147,000 stolen, side-by-side photos of promised improvements that existed only on padded invoices, and audio of Deirdre herself bragging about creative accounting and calling residents sheep. Gasps, tears, shouts. People were seeing the truth for the first time. When she tried to interrupt, screaming about lies and conspiracies, she made her biggest mistake, playing the race card, claiming neighbors shouldn't trust his kind with community values. The room froze for 3 seconds, then exploded with outrage. These were people who had raised each other's kids, mourned together, helped each other through tough times. They knew exactly what she was implying and weren't having it. Then came the knockout punch. I played the bribery recording. Her voice rang clear, admitting to years of theft and manipulation. Chad tried to argue the recording was illegal, but our attorney, Jennifer Olivia, immediately cited Colorado's single-party consent law. Detective Williams, who'd been watching from the back, stepped forward to announce that charges were being prepared. The FBI was reviewing for federal prosecution, and the state attorney general's office was pursuing civil penalties. Her real estate license gone for good. The vote to remove the entire board was unanimous. Deirdre and her allies walked out. In defeat, I was appointed financial oversight chair, a new management company was hired, and prosecution was approved without dissent. As TV cameras rolled, Deirdre had a final screaming meltdown, with Chad physically restraining her. I closed with the line I'd been waiting to say. My great aunt taught me communities are built on trust, not fear. Today, we take ours back. The ovation lasted 5 minutes. Justice had finally come to our little corner of suburbia. 6 months later, the headlines told the rest. Former HOA president sentenced to 4 years in federal prison for embezzlement and mail fraud. Her guilty plea came after her new lawyer explained fighting the case was like arguing with gravity. Chad got 18 months. Her nephew's landscaping business collapsed when the IRS found tax fraud worse than her HOA scams. The government recovered $312,000 through seized assets, including that infamous BMW everyone associated with her reign. We used the funds to actually improve the neighborhood. The pool was clean for the first time in years, HOA fees dropped from $180 to $95, and a brand new playground went up paid for with money she tried to steal. Kids once cited for chalk drawings now played on swings bought with her ill-gotten gains. My new consulting firm, Marcus Cleaning and Property Solutions, took off fast. HOAs all over Colorado called for help fighting corrupt boards. In my first year, I recovered over $2 million for 23 communities. The impact when statewide Colorado passed a law requiring public financial audits for any HOA over 25 homes, with whistleblower protections and criminal penalties for theft. Other states began following suit. Back home, we turned Millicent's old garden into a memorial filled with her favorite roses and a tool-sharing library. The stray cats still got fed. Tradition is tradition. The fund we'd started now gave scholarships to elderly residents in need. Gladys became the community historian, Sophia launched a nonprofit for HOA abuse victims, and Bob headed the infrastructure committee with real engineering know-how. Our second annual Millicent Day drew over 200 people, even from neighboring towns, and the local news covered our transformation. A documentary crew started filming, using our case as a model for HOA reform nationwide. I like to think Aunt Millicent would have loved knowing her work was now taught in law schools. The best part, walking the neighborhood on summer nights, hearing laughter where there used to be whispered complaints, smelling barbecue instead of fear. Property values rose 12%. Turns out, trust and fair leadership beat tyranny for market value. The truth is, the system can work, but only when good people make it work. Aunt Millicent taught me communities are worth the fight, and that David can beat Goliath with the right mix of evidence, law, and unity. So, tell me, what's your HOA story? The good, the bad, the ugly. Subscribe for more tales of ordinary people taking down extraordinary corruption. Next week, Karen tried to steal my parking spot. She didn't realize I owned the whole block. Welcome to HOA Stories, where neighbors fight back and karma comes calling. If you enjoyed this one, hit like, leave a comment, and subscribe for more weekly doses of neighborhood justice.